Hello everyone, this is Mr. Seymour, and this is the first of our video lecture slides. And today's lecture is going to be on Chapter 1, which is Understanding American Politics. Remember that the name of your textbook is American Politics Today, and the emphasis on this textbook is to get you to understand why politics and government and understanding government matters. So they're going to explain to you in this chapter why studying government matters. Now, the 2016 presidential election campaign and the surprising election of Republican Donald Trump highlighted the conflicts that are deeply embedded in American political life. Issues surrounding race, ethnicity, gender, geography, education, income level, and sexual orientation all seemed to further divide an already polarized country. Now the questions emerge. How will Trump govern? Will the divisions in American politics only become deeper, or will President Trump fulfill his election night pledge to represent all Americans and work to unite the country? As we speak, there are a lot of different events that have occurred that a lot of people are already, and we're 7 months into President Trump's term, they're already saying that President Trump is not matching up to what he promised. But no politician matches up to what he promises. The campaigning and leading are two very different things. So time will tell. But we are in a different era of politics right now, and it's a divided era of politics, and the divisions are getting even more. And the ideas of hyperpluralism, and a divided population within this country, dividing along a lot of different lines, race and income being two of them. Those are issues that we're having to deal with. Now, regarding the argumentative nature of politics, we should remember that debate means that multiple points of view are represented on controversial and important issues. Would it really be better if only a single perspective carried the day? What if government didn't have to offer any justification at all for its actions? In our constitutional democracy, debate is necessary to resolve conflicts. There are a lot of reasons why people dislike politics. Common complaints that people have are that it's too complicated, too argumentative, or that politicians are only in it for themselves. But in the bottom line, politics makes sense. You just have to know how to look for the answers. The map that I'm showing you shows red and blue in different shades, going by county and by precinct as to how different places voted. Texas is defined as generally as a red state. But if you'll notice, for instance, El Paso is over here, and it is not red, it is blue. A lot of the Rio Grande Valley and San Antonio are blue. But when you get into the rural areas of Texas, and you get especially outside of the major cities, here's Dallas, here's Houston, and here's San Antonio, Austin. You'll notice that they're blue. But everywhere outside of those areas tend to be red. So Texas is a rather conservative state, but we're not all conservatives. And as you look across the map, what we have is called the purpling of America. And purpling of America basically means that the media creates maps of the country on election night with red states where Republicans win and blue states where Democrats win. And what you see is if you look beyond the state level to the county level and the precinct level, you're going to see not red, not blue, but purple. And so we in America have become more of a purple nation. But there are a lot of places that used to be blue that are red. And that's one of the reasons that Donald Trump won. You're going to find more blue on the coasts here on the West Coast, here on the East Coast, you'll find more blue. There are a lot of places here in the northern part of the Midwest that were traditionally blue that have been turning red. So we are not a red and blue nation. We're more of a purple nation. Two important government functions described in the Constitution are to provide for the common defense and ensure domestic tranquility. The military and the local police are two of the most commonly used forces in government to maintain and fulfill those roles. Again, both the military and police are there military to provide for the common defense and the police to ensure domestic tranquility. One thing we have to understand is what we call the collective action problem, which is closely tied to another problem called free rider. We'll talk about that here in this slide. The incentive to benefit from another's work without making a contribution is the free rider problem. This leads to individuals in a collective action situation to refuse to work together. A classic example of a public good the book lists is a lighthouse. I would argue roads and bridges are also classic examples. If you have a public road, it's publicly accessible to anybody who wants to use it. Not everybody who uses it is contributing taxes to paying for it. Now, if you have a toll road, if you're going to use it, you're going to pay for it. Okay. A service or product that could not be produced by private markets because once a good is provided, anyone can benefit without paying is a public good. Supplying public goods is one way that governments promote the public welfare. Some other notable examples of collection problems are education. Who pays for education? Is it paid for at the local level? Is it paid for at the school district level, at the county level, at the state level, or at the national level? So government actions often are necessary because the private market doesn't provide public goods. And public goods are services or actions that, once provided to one person, become available to everybody. Roads, bridges, lighthouses, and so forth. Government can help solve the collection action problem. The way the government helps solve the collection action problem is that they provide public goods. A situation in which the members of a group would benefit by working together to produce some outcome, but each individual is better off by refusing to cooperate and reaping benefits from those who do the work, is a collective action problem. Collective action problems are complicated by the free rider problem. The free rider problem is the incentive to benefit from another's work without making a contribution, leading to individuals who refuse to work together. There are three big ideas that this book tends to center around. And one of those is that politics is conflictual, that the process matters, and that politics is everywhere. To say that politics is conflictual, many of our conflicts as a society are reflected in our politics and its familiar coalitions. Liberal versus conservative, for instance. Republican versus Democrat. The controversy is unavoidable. Politics determines our share of burdens versus benefits. For example, who pays how much in taxes and what the money is spent on. And it also regulates almost every aspect of our daily lives in which we are visible and invisible. People often dislike conflict, but it is critical to resolve differences through politics. So conflict is a natural part of the process. The political process matters. In American politics, power is derived from people, and government actions are the result of conscious decisions made by elected officials and bureaucrats. The interaction of institutional rules and procedures structures our mechanism for resolving conflicts and plays a big part in determining who wins and who loses. To say that politics is everywhere, from regulating food safety to air and water quality, to performing road maintenance and traffic safety, and including more hot-button issues like abortion, gun control, affirmative action, and decisions on war and peace, political decisions are everywhere. They're omnipresent. Some decisions can be resolved by compromise, for example, choosing a tax rate between the highest and lowest possible proposals, but others, such as choosing whether to make English the official language, are not as well suited for compromise. Many decisions involve what we call trade-offs. If you have one good, you can't have another. For example, the classic example in economics is guns and butter. You either spend your money on defense or you spend your money on domestic programs. But if you try to do both at the same time, you don't have enough money to go around. For example, if you have a limited amount of money and decide to spend it on one thing, like schools, you can't spend it on something else, like prisons. So do we put our money into schools or do we put our money into prisons? Conflict is inherent in American politics, which is a fact that has been driven home by the ongoing national debate over health care reform. In this picture, supporters and opponents of same-sex marriage are arguing in front of the Supreme Court building in Washington on the day that the court heard arguments in the case of Obergefell versus Hodges, which we'll study a little later. This 2015 case legalized same-sex marriage throughout the nation. The political process mattered in the 2016 presidential election, from determining who the candidates were to affecting which states received the most attention from the campaigns. And in this case, Hillary Clinton is shown debating Donald Trump. The idea that politics is everywhere means that government actions touch virtually every aspect of our lives, from requiring drone owners to register with the FAA to mandating equal funding for men's and women's sports in high schools and colleges. Moreover, everyday life often helps us to make sense of politics and politicians, such as Republican presidential candidate Ted Cruz's claim that Star Trek's Captain Picard was a Democrat while Captain Kirk was a Republican. On a typical day, the government plays a critical role in the life of everybody, but in a student's life as well, through federal programs, regulation, and spending. In addition to what is listed here on this page, in what other aspects of your life does government play a part? So let's look at a government in a normal student's daily life. 7:30, you wake up in the dorm, or you wake up at home, and you're funded in going to school by a federal program. You eat food that is regulated by the Food and Drug Administration. You get dressed in clothing subject to import tariffs and regulations. You read a weather report that uses data from the National Weather Service. You check your email using the internet, which is developed with federal funding. You drive to school in a car whose design is shaped by federal regulations. You drive past a post office, a military recruitment office, and an environmental cleanup site. You attend a lecture by a professor whose research receives federal funding. You ride home from school on federally subsidized mass transit. You pay your bill using federal funded student loans, calling a friend on a cellular network regulated by the Federal Communications Commission, watching TV on a station that is federally licensed. All of those things are examples of how politics is everywhere. I want you to think about how it is in your life Just go through and think in a day how many interactions you have with government that you never even realized before. The debate over income inequality in America and what should be done about it, for instance, raising the minimum wage, was one of the important issues that divided Republicans and Democrats and their supporters in the 2016 elections. Americans are committed to a free market, meaning that prices should be set by a combination of supply and demand, and to economic individualism. The government should not set prices. But Americans disagree on things like tax policy and social spending. While Americans typically share the same perspectives on the economy, Democrats and Republicans typically disagree on the extent to which the government should rely on what we call redistributive tax policies and disproportionately taxing the wealthy to help fund social programs for the poor. Do we tax the rich to fund programs for the poor, or do we just let those programs go? So divisions between strongly religious and secular citizens are part of the culture wars. To be secular is to have beliefs or ideologies that are not related to church or religion. While separation between church and state has been a major topic of debate and concern within our system of government since its inception, there's been an increased polarization between religious and secular beliefs since the 1980s. Americans disagree on moral and cultural issues on a variety of different perspectives. Evolution, abortion, school prayer, the war on drugs, immigration, those are just a few. You also are seeing a lot of racially oriented culture wars that are occurring and are expanding. Conflict is inherent in American politics, a fact that has been driven home by the ongoing national debate, again, over health care and religion and same-sex marriage and immigration in this case. Here on the border in El Paso, immigration is a very important issue. Immigration is a different issue when you go further into the United States past the border. There's a different view of immigration. It's a negative thing. In El Paso, if you're here in El Paso, it's more of a positive thing, immigration. We're used to it. When everyone or almost everyone agrees about a policy or program, the issue is generally dealt with quickly and without much conflict. In a rare example of compromise and cooperation, Republican and Democratic members of Congress, along with students, teachers, and administrators, applauded as President Obama signed the Every Student Succeeds Act in December 2015, which reduced the federal government's authority over state education standards, which superseded the No Child Left Behind Act, which had been set in 2003. Civil and voting rights contributed to the realignment of the South in the second half of the 20th century as more whites began supporting the Republican Party and the Democratic Party became seen as a champion of minority rights. So here, black and white people in Alabama wait in line together to vote at a city hall after enactment of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. So it wasn't until 1965 that you could have a scene like this where white people and black people were waiting together to vote. Up until then, white people voted, black people generally didn't. Only 62% of Americans describe themselves as white. Moreover, the proportion of Hispanics and Latinos in the population is about 18% and rising, but this category contains many distinct subgroups. What changes would you expect in American politics and policy if the actual population in 2060 matches the projections? Look at what's happening. The white population is decreasing. The Hispanic population is greatly increasing, almost by double. The African American population is kind of flat. The Asian population is increasing. The Native American population is kind of flat, but going down just a little bit. Hawaiian and Pacific Islanders staying the same, and those that declare two or more races mixed race are going up. This is doubling. The group that is going to see the greatest amount of increase in our society in the next 20 years is going to be Hispanics and Latinos. And El Paso is a model of what the United States is going to be like in the future. Political scientists usually use a left-to-right political spectrum to map public opinion. Most Americans do not consider themselves on the extreme left or liberal, or the extreme right conservative. These terms provide a useful shorthand for describing different outlooks. Sometimes people decide on their specific beliefs based on what they think others in their ideological camp, like liberals, conservatives, Green Party, and so forth, think about a given issue. So an ideology is a cohesive set of ideals and beliefs used to organize and evaluate the political world. To be conservative is to be defined by support for lower taxes, free market economies, a more limited role of national government. It is generally associated with Republicans and described as right-wing, to the right of the spectrum. Liberals are defined by support for stronger government programs and more market regulation. They're generally associated with Democrats and described as left-wing, or to the left of the political spectrum. Libertarians are a little mix of both. Preference for limited national government and often seen as quite conservative on issues like welfare, environmental regulation, and public support for education. But liberal issues on personal liberties like free speech, abortion, legalization of drugs, prostitution, and gambling. Libertarians, including those in the Tea Party, believe in very limited government. These Tea Party activists in this picture are at the Utah State Capitol in Salt Lake City, holding a flag with the libertarian motto, "Don't tread on me," while protesting against high taxes and government programs. Political scientists typically use that left to right political spectrum to map public opinion. While most Americans don't consider themselves on the left or the right, many Americans consider themselves to be in the middle. So we have to be careful, because we often have inconsistent ideologies. So be careful. Personal ideologies are not always consistent. A person may be liberal on some types of issues and conservative on others. Some people consider themselves to have certain ideologies, but then they have beliefs that are consistent with a different one. Many people are centrist, in the middle, in their ideologies, with a mixture of liberal and conservative points of view on different topics or governmental activities. Democracy, which we defined earlier as government by the people, in most contexts means representative democracy, in which the people elect leaders to enact policies. Democracies must have fair elections and at least two choices when you go to the voting polls. Equality, in the context of American politics, means equality before the law. Political equality, one person, one vote, and equality of opportunity, which is the equal chance of everyone to realize their potential, but not material equality, meaning not everyone has the same thing or gets the same thing. Liberty is political freedom, such as freedom of speech, press, assembly, and religion, those things that are in the Bill of Rights. These and other liberties protecting individuals from government control are outlined in the Bill of Rights of the United States Constitution. In democracies like the United States, voting is one of the most important and visible ways that citizens use the political process to express their opinions and to resolve conflict. Now let's go through some ideas of how politics works. 3 key ideas for understanding politics. First, politics is conflictual. Conflict and compromise are natural parts of politics. Political conflict over issues like the national debt, abortion, and health care reflect disagreements among the American people and often require compromises within government. And when you don't get compromises is when you get hyperpluralism. The political process matters. How political conflicts are resolved is important. Elections determine who represents citizens in government. Rules and procedures determine who has power in Congress and other branches of government. Politics is everywhere. What happens in government affects our lives in countless ways. Policies are related to jobs and the economy, food, safety and nutrition, student loans, and many other areas all shape our daily lives. We see political information in the news and encounter political situations in many of our lives on a daily basis. And this is the end of this particular lecture on Chapter 1.